Hello, and welcome to the Creative Connection, the podcast where we explore what it really means to claim your voice, reignite your vision, and root into what matters most. I'm Cyndi Thomsen, coach, storyteller, and believer in the power of story, presence, and the creativity that it takes to transform our lives. Each week, we'll dive into either just me on my own, or I will be interviewing someone. We'll dive into stories that shape us, the truths that whisper to be heard, and the courage that it takes for us to step forward, not perfectly, but step forward in our truth. Today's episode is called Whispers of Truth: Why Your Story Matters More Than Perfection. We have been on a journey over the course of the last several weeks. We've talked about the title of my podcast, Create and Connect. I shared about how being visible is not vain. And then I had my husband on, and we shared about what it means to be rooted and present in relationship with another. And we're digging deeper each week into that whisper of truth. People I'm looking forward to having on in the next couple of weeks, just to give you a preview of coming attractions, is a woman who has transitioned in her work life to be closer to creating the life that she is passionate about living. So today, we're going to start that journey that we may continue with this future guest. And then I'll have a gentleman on in October that will also talk about that. But today I have some questions for you before I dig into what I want to share. Question number one, and this is at the core of today's topic. Have you ever made a choice that turned out completely different than what you expected? Maybe it was in your work, maybe it was in a relationship, maybe it was in a passion project or something you really wanted to do, and you tried it and it didn't go the way you expected. There's a partner question to that one. Have you ever held yourself back from doing something that you really want to do because you're not sure if you're good enough? You're not sure if it'll be perfect enough. Today, I'm going to be talking about why the story and the why behind what you want to do is more important than if it's good enough or perfect. When I was a senior in high school, I had found what I thought was true love. I met this young man in January. In February, we started dating. We started dating a little bit more in March. He asked me to a senior prom. I went, and we were in love. We were so in love. I lifted him. He lifted me. We validated each other. We were so in love that even though my family was going to move from Minnesota to Washington, we were going to find a way to get married. And in fact, he said to me, How about I drive out to Washington sometime in the latter part of the summer and we'll drive back together and we'll stop in Jackson Hole, Wyoming and get married? Of course, I said yes. He dragged his heels on telling me when he would be coming. And I didn't think anything about it. I thought, well, he's working two jobs because he wants to go to culinary school and that takes money and it takes time. And so I finally one day while we were on the phone together, I said, how about I fly back to Minnesota and we can figure it out from there. He said, sure, if you want to. Great. Now, here's the thing. My parents had no idea any of this was going on. In fact, we were going to elope in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. All my parents thought was, she's boy sick. This won't last. They'll never go through with this driving across the country back to Minnesota. Why would she want to do that? She was accepted to the University of Washington. Why would she do that? So I hadn't told them anything. I was working while I was here in Washington, and I saved up enough money that I could afford a plane ticket, a one-way ticket, and that was it. That's all I could afford was a one-way ticket back to Minnesota. And I figured out when I could go based on my dad's travel schedule. My dad was at the time in insurance and he traveled quite a bit, and mom would go and take him to the airport and then go pick him up. And I figured out when he was going to be home, when he would be coming home, and I would book my plane reservation for that very same day. And I wouldn't tell them what I was doing until I got to the airport and dad was picked up. And then I would take my suitcase and I would fly off into the sunset. The appointed day came and I snuck my bag into the trunk unbeknownst to my mother. And we arrived at SeaTac International Airport. And there was my dad standing out on the curb. We picked him up. And when mom opened the trunk to put dad's suitcase in, I grabbed my suitcase and took it out. And they both looked at me like, what? Said, I'm going to go back to Minnesota. Dave can't make it out driving. So I'm going to fly back and we'll figure it out from there. Oh, well, do you know where you're going to live? I'll let you know when I get there. Do you know where you're going to work? I'll let you know when I get there. And I just walked away. I call that story my story of the time I ran away at 18. An 18-year-old runs away. The funny thing is, though, is there a time in your life you've run away from something because you thought that something else would be better? I really thought going back to Minnesota would be better. I had met people that had become my friends. I had a circle of friends. I knew nobody in Washington. I knew nobody going to the University of Washington. I was from a small town, and here I was in the big city, and I didn't like it. I wanted to go back to where I knew the people. I was very hopeful. I was happy when I boarded that plane. And that took courage for me to spend all of my money on a plane ticket, a one-way plane ticket, to what I thought was going to be my best future. I arrived in Minneapolis, and that young man picked me up at the airport, and he drove us to the town that he had gotten an apartment in. It was in Chanhassen. And he had chosen that town because there was a dinner theater there. And because I was in theater, he thought, well, she can get a job at the Chanhassen Dinner Theater. He let us into the apartment and we sat down on the couch to catch up. And the minute we did, it was like time stopped. There was more silence than there was talking. And the other thing that I noticed in that moment in time is that he had a hard time making eye contact. One of the things he and many other young men have commented on are my eyes. I have great eyes, they tell me. They're blue, and I like to make eye contact with people. And he couldn't look me in the eyes. I remember sitting there wondering, what is happening? Have I gone into another universe? He was sitting on one end of the couch and I was sitting on the other. We were nowhere near where we had been when I left in June. A little voice inside my head said, say something. How have you been? I missed you. To which what I remember him responding was, I've been good, very busy. And that was it. Deep inside my body, I began to wonder, what is happening? Have I made a mistake? This is not what I expected. What am I going to do? After another long period of what seemed like forever silence, you know what forever silence is. It's probably not more than a minute or two, but what felt like forever silence, he began. You know, I've been meeting with my minister at church. Oh, that's nice. And we've been talking about how maybe 18 is a little young to get married. Oh. In fact, I'm not sure that I like you that much to get married. My panic button went. OMG. Before I had left in June, we'd bought a ring. It was a beautiful ring. I remember it. He had shared he would give it to me when he came and got me. My brain was going, I have no money. I don't have a job. What am I going to do? I was scared. I was embarrassed. I was hurt. I was disappointed. Any sense of hope had evaporated from me. This certainly was not perfect. And perhaps I was not good enough. And that's why he didn't like me like that. But I learned something during this time period. So the rest of the conversation went something like this. You can stay here in the apartment while you figure things out. And I'll either stay at a friend's house or stay at my parents' house. I said, I'm tired. I think I need to go lay down. I got up. I walked into the bedroom, which, by the way, the furniture that was in the bedroom was mine from my parents' house where we had lived in Minnesota. And I laid down on the bed. And then I heard the apartment door open and close. And I was all alone. I was truly alone. I had run away from my parents, not telling them anything, to what I thought was my future. And it wasn't my future. I needed to figure out how I was going to make money and if I was going to stay. I needed to figure out if I was going to live there or somewhere else. I needed to figure out if what he said to me was real or not. Some of the takeaways that I took away from, well, double use of that word, excuse me. Some of the things that I learned that I took away from that experience are mistakes aren't the enemy. They are often the path to clarity. And I'll share more about that in a moment. Getting it right, just right, getting it perfect can be a distraction. And that paying attention to the truth, our truth, can be the connecting bit to not only ourselves, but the world around us. So September gave me about a week or so, and I found a job. But in order to get to that job, I had to take 3 buses into Minneapolis and 2 buses out to go to a mall that was literally, if I had had a car, would have been about a 15-minute car ride to my job. And there were some days when I closed that this young man had to come pick me up from my work and bring me back to the apartment. I think he felt a little guilty or maybe a little sad or maybe a little, I don't know. But he would include me in group things with his friends. And he let me stay in the apartment. He did not stay there. On the odd occasion that he did, it was usually on the couch. Long about Thanksgiving time, he went home to his parents' house to have Thanksgiving. And I was in this apartment by myself. And I remember Thanksgiving weekend, the phone rang and I answered it. That was back in the day of landlines. And I answered it. It was a friend from the small town that I grew up in who was working in a hotel near the airport. And I was surprised that this person had called me because I'd had no interaction with them in many years. And they said, "Hey, Cyndi, I got your name and your phone number from your dad. He's here at my hotel and he'd really like to speak with you. In that moment in time, I felt naked. I had no clothes on. I was alone. I was lost. I had not had a single conversation with my parents since I got on that airplane 2 months, 2.5 months prior. I told this person, no, I'm sorry, I'm busy. I don't really have time to have a conversation with him. Wish him happy holidays. And then this friend said, well, he'd like to talk to you about your brother. Oh, okay. So dad gets on the phone and dad says, hey, Cyndi, how are you? We did the universal small talk with neither of us really saying anything. I'm sure you've had a conversation like that, either with a parent or with a child or with a brother or with a friend where you've not necessarily seen each other in a long time. And he finally said, your brother's had a hard time with this move, and he's been seeing a psychologist, and that psychologist thinks it would be a good idea if you came back at least to have a couple of sessions with the whole family so that we can kind of talk through what your brother's been going through. I shared that I was working at a retailer and that I would need to get permission because now we're into the holidays and there are blackout dates for taking time off, especially something like that where I'd have to get on an airplane and fly someplace and spend some days and then fly back. That was the end of that conversation. I said I would check and I would get back to him. Well, I checked with my boss who said, well, you could go between Christmas and New Year's before we do inventory. As long as you're back for inventory, I'm fine with that. I said, great. What dates? So she said you could go the evening of the 26th, and as long as you come back by the 31st, that should work. That's plenty of time. I think that's about as much time as I thought I could actually handle my mom and my dad and the undercurrent of embarrassment about what I had gotten myself into and to wrestle with the what am I going to tell him when I get there? So I called my parents and I said, well, I can come on the evening of the 26th, and as long as I'm back by the 1st, that should be fine. Dad purchased a round trip airplane ticket for me from Minnesota to Seattle and back to Minnesota. The holiday came and went, and the morning that I was to fly back home, we had some nasty weather in Minneapolis. Ice storm, cold, more was coming, and I had to go to work. I had to finish my prep for inventory, which was going to be on the 1st. And the young man whose apartment I had been living in called me at work. I think I had gotten there at like 6 or 7 for the after Christmas sales. Called me at 6 or I probably called me about 8 o'clock in the morning and said, hey, Cyndi, they're closing or they're canceling flights. Can you check with your boss to see if you can get out early? Otherwise, I don't think you're going to be able to go. Well, that was kind of him. To this day, I've always wondered why why he worried about it. Did he really like me? Maybe. I never asked him. Hmm, that's an interesting thought. Well, I talked to my boss, and my boss said, "Sure, you can go now. It's kind of dead." So I let this young man know that I could leave early as soon as he could get there. And lo and behold, he was there within 20 minutes with my suitcase. And he took me to the airport and he said, "How about this? I'll park in the temporary parking. I'll go inside with you to see if we can get you on an earlier flight or not," because his fear was the or not was going to happen and he was going to have to take me back home. So he came inside with me and I walked up to the counter and said, "Hey, I'm on the 6 something flight to Seattle. What are the likelihood of me getting on an earlier flight?" And she said, "There's one leaving in 30 minutes if you can make the gate." Passed the bag off to her, ran to the gate, said goodbye to him, ran to the gate, made the flight right before they closed the doors. On that airplane ride back to Seattle, I was trying to figure out what I was going to say. I had made a mistake. I had chosen to run away for a person. And the whole reason I had done that disappeared. Just disappeared. I spent the 3 days in Seattle, visited with the entire family in one of my brother's sessions. And during this entire time, I was still wrestling with that question. What do I say? There was such a disconnection between my family and me. Each of us individually, there were 4 of us, my brother and myself, my mom and my dad. There was such disconnection and no communication. This is when I learned that mistakes aren't the enemy. I had made a mistake. I really needed to figure out what I wanted to do and who I was. But I had given that up for this other person. And my trying to get it right by going to him created distance. And even when we were sitting around the circle in this psychologist's office, we circled around the truth and we were not connected. On the morning I was to fly back, which was the 31st, I shared a little bit with my mom and dad. I started by saying, I thought this person was the person I loved and wanted to get connected with and marry. But when I got there, realized they weren't. That took a huge amount of courage to say that. I apologize for not telling them why I was leaving. I apologize for not telling them where I was going to stay, that I didn't have a job. Little nuggets of things. And while my story to them was not polished by any sense of the word, I needed to start to say those things to create a connection again with the two people that for most of us in the world will love us unconditionally no matter what we do. When I arrived back in Minneapolis, this young man picked me up from the airport, took me back to the apartment, said, go ahead and get changed. We're going to go to a New Year's Eve party. Some of our friends from that you had met at prom will be there. When the ball in New York dropped and we watched it drop and we watched the countdown, my thinking was, he'll kiss me. The last 4 months will have all been a strange figment of my imagination, and we really are supposed to be together. Or he won't, and I'll try and figure out a way to go back to Seattle. There were about 6 people at this party, and when the ball dropped, he kissed someone else first, and then me, and my kiss was on the cheek. Little whispers of that truth that this wasn't the right relationship had been going on since we had phone calls, conversations during the summer. But because I so expected a certain outcome to happen, I didn't listen to that truth. And I told myself a different story that was perfect. It was the perfect story of how my life was supposed to be. I gave my 2 weeks notice, had made enough money to buy a one-way ticket and a little extra back to Seattle. Told this young man that any furniture that was in the apartment was his to do with whatever he wanted to do. And if there was anything there that he thought I should have, he could figure out a way to give it to me. When I got back to Seattle, I slept for weeks. All of that pent up emotion about making that choice that turned out to be completely different than what I expected. Took it out of me, man. Now it's interesting because that was in 1980, a long time ago. And about 3 years ago, I started writing my memoir, and that story was one of the first stories that popped up for me. And I wasn't quite sure when I started a free write of my memoir, which is what I did for 3.5 days. I just wrote and wrote and wrote and didn't pay attention to what I wrote. I had prompts and I was just writing what was coming to me. And when I went back through it over the course of the next couple of months, that story just hung there. I wondered what the big lesson in that story was. I'm going to go back to those two questions I asked at the beginning. Have you ever made a choice that turned out completely different than you expected? Or have you held yourself back because you didn't feel perfect enough? So the first one, my story illustrates very well, but it also illustrates the second one. And I'm going to share another part of the story. I had been accepted to the number 4 school in the country for theater. And it was the University of Washington, and they had a fabulous children's theater program, and they had a fabulous theater, and they had a professional actors training program. But I was scared to death. The school, University of Washington, was double the size in undergraduates. Pardon me, it was triple the size of students in their undergraduate program than the town I grew up in. And I heard a rumor, which I later experienced, that one of the classes in one of the buildings had 750 people in it. My graduating class was 230. Scared. I was scared that I was not good enough to even be able to exist and live in the school that I was accepted to. And I think that that was playing in my decision, my choice to run away. Over the years since then, and it's been many years over the years, 45 years from then, I have had other times in my life where I have held myself back because I didn't think I was good enough. I have had other moments in time where things did not turn out the way they expected. And a couple of new questions began to pop up on a repeated basis. For me to stop for a moment and consider before I shut the door or open the door to an opportunity. And I'd love to share those reflection questions with you. And if you want to take a moment now to write about them, I give you that opportunity. I will allow about a minute between each of the different reflection questions for you to take time to write. Or if now is not the time because you're driving or you're doing something else, come back to this or jot the questions down and just let them sit and think about them. So question number 1, where in your life have you been waiting for the perfect moment, only to realize that the moment may never come? I'll repeat that. Where have you been waiting? Where in your life have you been waiting for the perfect moment, only to realize that that moment may never come? It can be in your work life, in your relationship life, in your health. Just take a moment to consider that, and I'll repeat it one more time. Where in your life have you been waiting for the perfect moment, only to realize the moment may never come? Just finish up that thought. Great. And the other reflection question that I've been sitting with, and this is more recent in the last 5 or so years, that first one, I think it was probably about 10 years ago that I began to consider that. There was a point in time in my career where I felt stuck. I wondered if I was causing the stuck. So that question came up. But this next one, somewhere around 2016, a version of this popped up, but then in 2019, it really did. And then as the pandemic began, I wrestled with this one. What story or truth, what story or truth is whispering for you to tell it? Now, on this one, don't stop yourself. There's going to be something that's going to come right up, and you're going to go, oh, no, no, no. Only you have to see this. I want you to own what comes up. If we think about the topic for today's discussion, whispers of truth. What is whispering inside you? Your story matters, even if it's not perfect. So take just a moment and consider that. So as you finish up whatever's just bubbled up, this one I encourage you to come back to multiple times. Several weeks ago, my husband and I were doing a writing prompt with a group of people that we write with on Saturday mornings. And there was a similar prompt to this. What is calling you? What is something that you are being called to do, to live, to walk into? We each wrote for our 20 minutes. I had to go off to an appointment. He continued to write. And then a week later, yes, well, not quite a week later. That was the last Saturday of July. And then I think it was Friday. I asked him, I said, what were you writing about? What was coming up for you? What was bubbling up for you? I'll share mine. Let's have a little talk about this. We wrote the same thing. A desire to have a school, to teach others. And for years, I've had this story about how I think Dan and I, who are for the most part a happily married couple, we do have our moments in time where we don't always agree on everything, but that's fine. That's human. But we've journeyed through life together for nearly 44 years. November, we will have been a couple this November for 44 years. We have been married for 41 years. And yes, we were babies when we got married. But the point is, I have often thought, because we are asked, how do you guys do it? That we should be teaching other couples. So we decided over the course of the next week, and we met with a coach that we both have worked with, to create the Institute for Extraordinary Relationships. We shared this a couple weeks ago, right here on this podcast. Check out that podcast. But we both had the same story that was trying to be told. And it was a viable thing. We both have talents that could happen. You know, I went back to graduate school in my 40s to get an MBA because I thought I needed to have the book knowledge in order to start a theater school. I do theater and I do teach people about theater, but I don't need a school. But I do have the book knowledge now. I know about finances and economics, and I had a professor tell me I should be an econ person. No, thank you. I'm more into the creative. So don't poo-poo or push down or hold back that thing that bubbled up for you. Sit with it. Write about it. Don't share it with anyone if you don't want to. That is not the point of this. The point of this is for you to own your story, your truth. That story is more important than you getting it right. If you take nothing else away from today, know that that story that's whispering its way up is more important than you getting it right. And I have to be honest with you. It wasn't until I hit my mid-50s that I believed that. So if you are younger than mid-50s and you're wrestling with this, know that it's true. And if you need to talk to someone about it who is non-biased, reach out. Let me help you. In fact, I have a way to help you. So a couple of weeks ago, I was doing a Monday evening intro class to Rooted in You. Rooted in You is a safe space group exploration of our stories and how you can reclaim your voice that's coming from that story. You can re-envision and reignite your future. That's exactly what rooted in you is. Your story does matter way more than getting it right and perfect. Well, if you have not figured this out, this is recorded this week because I have someplace I need to be at 5 o'clock on Friday. But I hope you find value in this. And I am going to include in the show notes a reflection journal for you to go a little deeper in this that I shared with my Rooted in You participants. It's a very simple 5 reflections. Do it one each day on top of what we've already done, which I encourage you to go back to. Thank you so much for listening to The Creative Connection. And if you've been waiting for the perfect time to share your story, this invitation is for you to begin now, in the present moment. I will be sharing during Sunday's blog another story and another version of this. So it's a companion blog. And I would encourage you to say yes to Rooted in You, where we can reclaim our voices together. Don't forget to subscribe so you will never miss an episode. And if today's message resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next week, keep showing up. Keep listening to the whispers. Your story matters. Your story matters so that you can reclaim your voice, reignite your vision, and step into the you were meant to be. I will see you next Friday. Have a fantastic weekend.